What we have here is Paul is opening and really beginning in some sense, the introduction to this letter is a conversation that he's inviting them to be a part of on the subject of prayer. Now, prayer for a great number of us is something that we probably don't give a lot of concentrated thought and effort towards. Perhaps it's something that is a part of your routine, something you do, and so it's something, a way you fill up your day. But the subject of prayer specifically for a great number of us isn't something we spend a terrific amount of time focusing on. And so in some sense, what Paul offers us here is what can become an analysis or a metric whereby we evaluate and consider the ways that we are praying. And so notice that as Paul begins this, what he writes is, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you. So Paul, even right from the very beginning, offers us some insight into the directionality of his prayer. He doesn't write and say, Philippians, I'm so thankful for you guys. You're just so amazing. And certainly there's a place for this. But what Paul does is he's orienting his prayer in thankfulness to God. So if you were to take the prayers that you had this last week and on the column on the left, and you were to write all the things that you have thanked God for, and so maybe it's, I said this in the first service, maybe that you're among this place and you've been praying for rain, and certainly know you're very a righteous person and you can just relax, okay? We got plenty. And so you've been praying for rain, you've been praying for health, you've been praying for a job. And so there are just a number of things you've been praying for. And so that's all in kind of this left-hand column. And you've been going down through, and if you're to track and chronicle all your prayers, all the things you're praying for, and then maybe on the right-hand side of the page, you're praying the things that you're thanking God for who he is. God, I thank you that you are kind. God, I thank you that you are patient. God, I thank you that you are gracious. What would it look like? What would the balance of this look like? Well, for a great number of us, what we'd find, what we'd discover through this analysis of our prayer is that we tend to be the kinds of people who pray for things instead of being the kinds of people who go to God and thank him for who he is. So what Paul does is he changes this. And in fact, you can see him do this in Ephesians 1:16, and he also does this in 1 Thessalonians 1 and 2, that he's thanking God. He's thanking God every time he thinks of the Philippians. And so for Paul, what does that look like? Well, you'll remember back to the book of Acts in chapter 16, gives us the chronicle, gives us an accounting of the founding of the church there in Philippi. So Paul is saying, when I think about Lydia, when I think about meeting her down by the river, when I think about that demon-possessed girl that was following behind us and blathering on and on and on, and when I think about what it is to be beaten, and when I think about what it is to take the blows of the people on my body, and when I think about the soreness in my jaw or my face, or when I look and I see the scars for what it was to suffer for you and to be put into jail, and all these various remembrances, when I remember our time together, man, I thank God. I turn around and I primarily thank God. And one of the things we also get from this is the consistency of Paul. This is something he's doing time and time again. And so when Paul finds himself in these situations, anytime they come to mind, he gets himself in there and he's reorienting his mind to thank God for these things. So it is the manner, it is the consistency, it is the permanency in his disposition of prayer. Look at what he goes on to say in verse 4. He says, always in every prayer of mine for you all. So this is the three alls, or rather you could say it's not the three y'alls. There's the three alls in here. Look at what he says. It is always, it is all prayer, and it is all of you. There's a constancy to this. So Paul doesn't find himself engaged in kind of this rote, empty prayer. He doesn't find himself engaged in just kind of, sometimes I pray about this and sometimes I don't. He says it is always. It's difficult to find ourselves in the category of always. It's easier for us to find us in the category of sometimes or occasionally. So in this, we see the challenge of Paul. Find yourself being in the category of always. Find yourself being in the category of the kind of person, us being the kind of people, collectively being the kind of church who is always finding ourselves in prayer. Always. He says, I thank my God in every remembrance of you. And then when do I do this? He says, always, in every prayer. So all the times when Paul finds himself praying, he remembers of them. And when he remembers of them, he goes to the Lord and offers thanks to God for them. And then Paul does something rather remarkable. He says, I do it for all of you. For all of you. This is kind of back to this idea of a prayer list. Back to this idea of offering an analysis of our prayers. Let's go back to this same idea and think of the people you pray for, the number of people you pray for. And so it's you get to the end of the week and you begin to count back over the number of people you pray for, and you say, oh, it looks like it's me, myself, and I. So I have 3 people I'm praying for, and I have my family, and that's kind of the royal we. That's kind of collectively us. But how many people are you praying for, and how expansive is your prayer? Notice that Paul, as he's writing to this church there in Philippi, he knew that they had issues. It would be so much easier and say, God, I just want to thank you for all the people that are on my team, the supporters of me, and God, the haters are going to hate, but we're going to pray for them as well, but just kind of categorically as a group of people that are hard to work with. There are 2 ladies there in Philippi, Euodia and Syntyche, and Paul says that, he said, man, they're disagreeing, and so I urge you to help them to agree in the Lord. And what does that mean? It says help them to agree to disagree and to pursue Jesus together. To agree to disagree. They don't have to believe the same things. They don't have to head in the same direction as far as being lockstep with one another, but I urge them to agree in the Lord. Hey, let's make Jesus great together, and we can disagree on these peripheral things. But Paul, when he's thinking about this church there in Philippi, he's praying for all of them. And think about what that would look like for you to expand your prayer list. And so you're analyzing, we're looking together at the number of people we prayed for this last week, the number of situations globally that we're praying for. Y'all consider this. When you pray, you're going before the high King of heaven. You're going before the sovereign creator God of all things. Hebrews chapter 1 tells us that Jesus upholds all things by the word of his power. And when you pray, Jesus is carrying those messages to the throne of God on your behalf. So there is terrific potential power in prayer. But some of us, our prayers they're rote, they're constant, and they're constant to the point of being unthinking. There's no originality, there's no unction in our prayer, and there's no expansiveness in our prayer. And so think about this. Think about if you are to leverage your collective ADD for the purpose of praying widely. Think about if you're to leverage the collective power of distraction to pray widely. And so you're driving down your street and you see your neighbor's yard and you think how tall their grass is. And they don't have those nice rows back and forth. There's no crisscross pattern. It's just weeds and plenty of them. And you take that as an opportunity to pray for your neighbor. Or maybe you sit down and the person beside you in church, man, they're just chatty Cathy. They talked all the way through the songs, and the only time they shut up is when they go to the bathroom. Maybe it's a time for you to pray, amen? Y'all got some tiny bladders, but listen. And so, maybe I think one of the reasons God allows us in some sense to be distracted is so that we can see our capacity to engage in a wide level. So you're at Walmart and you're checking out and you're looking at the people around you also struggling to navigate the self-checkout. I mean, they've got some type of vegetable up there and they can't remember its name and none of the pictures look quite like it and the weigh thing doesn't work. And so the light starts flashing and they're sweating all over. Pray for your brother in need. So he says, I pray for you all. So we can pray for other members of our family. We can pray for other believers in this body. We can pray for the other churches. Maybe for some of us, what that looks like is going on the internet, just simply Googling churches in Hardin County or churches in Central Kentucky, and you take a list of these churches and you begin to pray down through them. Maybe more expansive than this. And you pray trouble spots globally or places where Christians are persecuted over the world, and you come to recognize that the fastest growing church planting movement, the place in the world where more people are coming to faith faster right now, is Iran. And so you begin to pray for the underground church movement in Iran, and you begin to pray that those people would stand firm for the gospel, and you begin to pray, God, what would you have me do for them? God, how would you have me to support them? That's what it looks like to pray for them all. It's being open to God, expanding, moving, changing our prayers, and expanding our focus. But recognize as well that Paul gives us this disposition of prayer. He gives us a disposition of prayer that's so incredibly helpful and corrective for us. And simply says, making my prayer with, everybody say, joy. Joy. It's just fascinating that as we look at the word order here within the Greek, it actually begins with the idea of joy. It says, with joy, or with joy, the prayers making. With joy, the prayers making. And so Paul comes into this idea. He says, listen, sometimes when we find ourselves engaged and ready to pray, we're just not joyful. There's no joy in our prayer. There's no excitement as we approach the throne of God in prayer. Now listen, God's not asking you to put on a happy face. He's not asking you to smile. He's not asking you to engage in dishonesty. What he's saying is that as you encounter God, he will change your mourning into dancing. God can change your sorrow into gladness. When we recognize, perhaps out of James in chapter 1, he says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet various trials of many kinds. And so there is an accounting that comes into this. There is this mental practice whereby we're exchanging sorrow, we're exchanging heartache, we're exchanging difficulty for joy. And so when Paul goes in and he's offering prayer on behalf of the church there in Philippi, even as he sits in house arrest, he is doing so from this disposition of joy. It's not joy at the outcome. It's not joy because he knows things are going to get better for them. It's not joy because this is just the way that he gets down, but it is joy because he's communing with the high King of heaven. And as he's communing with the high King of heaven, and as he's having conversation with God the Father, by the power of the Spirit, it's changing something inside of him. You know, it occurs to me that some of us would do well as we approach the throne of grace to say a simple prayer before God. And in some sense, it's a prayer of confession. And it is to say, God, there is no joy in me. But as I come before you and I want to pray to you, and I want to thank you, and I want to pray for all these things and all these people, there's zero joy in me. And so God, would you effect a cosmic exchange, taking my sorrow and replacing it with joy? Can I read verses like James chapter 1 and what it is to count it all joy when I meet various trials of many kinds? And I just think that's just too much. That's just too difficult. But I believe you can do all things. I believe you can accomplish all things. And so God, would you work in my life to produce joy? I think a good way of considering this and evaluating this and understanding what joy is Karl Barth, this 20th century theologian. He described joy as a defiant nevertheless. It's a defiant nevertheless. So whatever circumstance we happen to find ourselves in, terrible or amazing, it's engaging these things and saying, nevertheless, I give myself to a pursuit and an experience of joy. Now, some of us, as we sit here, man, you are well-versed in prayer. You're the person that if I wanted to learn to pray, if we collectively wanted to learn to pray, we would benefit from having you take the stage, put on seminars, and we know by our conversations with you that you readily find yourself engaging in prayers, and that for a vast number of us. But a great number of us, we don't understand a great deal about prayer. You've been a Christian long enough that you know that there's a cadence of prayer in the church, and that's largely at the point of transition. And you know, and you hear people pray, but you really have no understanding of prayer in general. So I want to take a brief sidetrack. I want to take a brief look at Jesus' words on prayer, and I think it could be helpful to us. And so flip over to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, the first book of the New Testament. I think it's a pretty clever name. That's my name. That's my name. Some of you have never been here before, and you're wondering why that was mildly amusing. Not funny. I think there's a place for humor. I just can't remember where I'll put it sometimes. All right, Matthew 6. Jesus is teaching the Sermon on the Mount, and he begins to have a conversation with the disciples about essentially how to pray. They're curious. Essentially, knowing you as the Son of God, is there a different way that we should engage in how to pray? So Jesus, he does this fascinating thing. He teaches them to pray in light of what they see. He takes what they see and how they conceive likely prayer, and then he shapes, he models, he changes what their prayer should be like. Look at verse 5. He says, and when you pray, so there's an expectation of, he says, you must not be like everybody say, hypocrites. There we go. You must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners. For what purpose? That they may be seen by others. So you have this group of people that their whole point in praying is that so people see them and they think, she's really religious. Like, she's so close to God. Like, I saw him in the synagogue last week, and man, like the words they use, I mean, it's just like they have a line to God and Shakespeare at the same time. It was amazing. What dost thou say? It was so good. The whole point and purpose that Jesus says of this person is that they would be seen by others, that other people would see them, hear them, and be wowed by them. Notice what he doesn't say. The purpose, the intentionality, the effort they're engaging in is to spend time with God. Now, within Jesus' day, it was most common for people when they prayed to pray out loud, not to pray silently in their head, not to engage in a whole bunch of unspoken prayers, but to utter prayers and prayers out loud. So he says, this group of people, they stand, they pray, they want others to see them. So this is what he says to them. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. They got what they were looking for. Receiving the subject of their prayers, that's way down the line for them. Because what they really want is recognition. And they've already got that. They're not as concerned that they get the things they're praying for, because what they really want is the recognition, the praise of those around them. So he says, truly I say to you, they've received their reward. Verse 6, but when you pray, go into your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And so what he says there is, listen, but you got these men and women out there, they're standing, they're praying, they want everybody to see them. What I want you to do is I want you to go in, I want you to go into your house, I want you to shut the door, and when you shut the door, I want you to pray out loud. And your Father sees that. And he's honoring that. Because your prayer isn't primarily for the purpose of seeing others and being praised or adored by them. When you pray, your desire is to spend time with God. And as you spend time with God, he is changing you in who you are. Now, there is benefit to praying out loud. One of the benefits from praying out loud is that, well, let's just go with the first one. You're not going to fall asleep. You're less likely. Some of you are you have narcolepsy and you're going to get that checked, but you're going to be less likely to fall asleep. You're going to be less likely to find yourself being distracted. Because too many of us, what happens when you're praying in your head? You're praying in your head and your prayer is something like this. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for just who you are and what you do and how you change the light bulb. The light bulb is out. I have got to change. Man, I never started that project. I wonder where I put that list. Did I buy screws? The light bulb. Screw the light bulb in. Praying. I was praying. I think I'm done praying now. Yep, I'm done. Like when you pray out loud, you catch yourself in that, right? And so when these intruding thoughts begin to make their way into your mind, you can just say, hey, listen, God, that's funny. And so I'm so thankful that you have a sense of humor and you see how crazily distracted I am. And so praying out loud helps us to stay on track. It helps us to listen to what we're saying. And then some of us, what we'll find is that as we're saying things, we're saying the same kinds of things over and over and over again. And look, Jesus addresses that. He says, when you pray, don't heap up empty phrases like the Gentiles do, hoping that by their empty words, they will be heard. Hoping that they will be heard by their many words, their many and empty words. And so you've seen this, you've experienced this. Maybe some of us have been guilty of these same things. When we get ready to talk and have a conversation with God, we don't really have anything to say. And so we say the same thing 50 different ways. It's the thesaurus approach to prayer, the synonym approach to prayer. God, you're so great. Great, wonderful, majestic, awesome, spectacular, terrifying in some sense. You captivate my fear. God, I just want to thank you for, and then you just run through this litany of things and you begin to describe them using all these various synonyms. He says, listen, don't think that because you say a lot of stuff, God is moved. It's not like God is up in heaven and he's got all these scorecards and you're looking for the 10 out of 10. You're trying to get there. God is not wowed by your prayer. He sees your heart and he wants this earnestness of your prayers. And in some sense, we would really benefit by the simplicity of our prayer. The simplicity of our prayer. He says, they believe that they're heard for the many words, but don't be like them. Then he offers this good news. He says, but your heavenly Father knows what you need before you ask him. How many of us, I wonder, our experience in prayer is to know that there is something wrong. We know that there's something off. We're not able to isolate it. We're not able to describe it. We know what it feels like, but we're not able to articulate it well, not to ourselves and certainly not to somebody else. And the good news in this is that before you even pray a word, God knows exactly what you need. I think the good news for me in so much of this is that God knows what I need, and he knows the difference between what I need and what I want. And he knows some of the things I want, and he knows they would be bad for me. And he knows some of the things you want, and he knows that they would be bad for you. They'd be bad for us. He gives us what we need. So he goes to the disciples, and he says, listen, you need to have a simple approach to prayer. And so he offers them a model prayer, not a prayer for us to pray all the time, but a model prayer. That's why he says, pray then like this. He doesn't say, pray then this. He says, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. God, could your name be praised? Would it be lifted high? Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. God, I want to see your rule everywhere. And I want to see your rule here on this earth, just like it is in heaven. I want to see the heavenly realities invade the here and now. God, would you sustain me? Would you give us this day our daily bread? And God, would you forgive me? God, I've got so many debts. I have so many ways I've sinned against you, ways I am even now aware of, becoming aware of, and seeking to hide from. God, would you forgive me my debts? And God, would you also help us to forgive those who've wronged us? Would you help us to forgive those who've wronged us? And Father, would you help me not to succumb to temptation, but ultimately, would you deliver me from evil? And that being, would you keep me from the evil one, from his schemes? He longs to steal, kill, and destroy. And so, God, help me not to find myself tacitly in league with him. Help me not to find myself complicit in his schemes. God, help me to live a life in allegiance to you in all things. That's some of what it looks like to pray. It's a heart open to God, a heart ready to be fashioned by him, and a heart that drops all form of pretense, that engages humbly before him. It is communing with the Lord. Now, as Paul is going through the subject of prayer and addressing these things, what we find in verse 5 is the reason why he prays for the Philippians in this way. He says plainly, it is because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. James Montgomery Boyce, a pastor in Philadelphia in the 20th century, speaking of this word partnership, which is rendered elsewhere fellowship, said it this way. He says, it is a communion created by God. It is a communion created by God. So this partnership that we have in the gospel, this partnership that they had with him in the gospel, it was financial, it was prayer, and it was supportive. It was financial, it was prayer, and it was supportive. They worked with Paul. They supported Paul on his other missionary trips. They prayed for Paul. They were sending someone to bring him support, even as he was there under house arrest in jail. And so we begin to consider both individually and corporately what it looks like for us to be partnered together, to have communion with God for the sake of expanding the gospel. I want us to think about it in terms of a couple of different places. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is talking about what it looks like for the gospel to come through our lives. In verse 14, 15, and 16, he says this. He says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to the whole house. So he gives an example. He says, you understand how silly it would be to have a city set on a hill and to try and obscure it from the vision of their enemy. You just couldn't do it. You wouldn't get everybody to be on board. It would be difficult. There's no way you're going to accomplish this. He said, think of another silly example. Imagine you have all these people in your house and you go over and you light a light to give light to the house, and you're to go over there and you take a bowl and you put it over the top of it. You're working against the purpose of the light. You're working against the design of this city on the hill. So he says, in the same way, let your light shine before others. In the same way, let your light shine before others. For what purpose? That they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. You're partnered with God for the expansion of the gospel. You are partnered with God for the expansion of the gospel. As if Christ is making his proclamation through you in the way you live. So everything you say and everything you do, God longs to leverage for the proclamation of the gospel. You are partnered together with him. The light of the gospel shining through your lives. Paul, addressing in some sense this same thing, wrote these words in Philippians. In Philippians chapter 2, he says, do all things without grumbling or disputing. What things? Y'all grumble almost worse than the first service, and they got up so much earlier. What things? All things. That's great. That's good. A little bit of disputing still. For what purpose? He says, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine. Among whom you shine as lights in the world. You see, God has partnered with you for the glory of God and the expansion of the gospel. And he's created it in such a way that the glory of God and his gospel shines through you. And he longs to partner with you. Do you know that God longs to partner with you to reach your neighbors for the gospel? God longs to partner with you to reach the people on your street. God longs to partner with you to reach your colleagues. God longs to partner with you to reach all the people that he has sovereignly put within your sphere of influence, in your schools. And if you're a senior, you're going off and you're doing potluck, which is the scariest way to meet new friends and people you never want to talk to again, and roommates. But God is even now sovereignly moving and creating in their heart a readiness to hear the gospel from you and to see the faithfulness of the gospel lived in the way that you're going to step into this new experience. Paul said that they are partnered together for the gospel from the first day until now. So let's look at it individually and corporately. So maybe some of you are here today and you have never joined together in partnership with the gospel because you've never submitted yourself to salvation in the name of Christ. So maybe you look at it and the way you consider it is there are a number of prerequisites. There are a number of things that have to be done first before you can come to faith in Jesus. The Bible tells us that God has taken care of all the things that need to be done, and that in the person of Jesus. You see, in Jesus, God laid upon him the penalty and the punishment for every misdeed you could ever do or ever will do. Jesus took those upon himself. He died, and then God raised him back up from the dead. And in that, God is calling you to commune with himself. He's calling for you to know him and to be forgiven by him through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So he invites you into that invitation. For others of us, we are followers and believers of Christ. And so what does it look like for you to partner with God in the expansion of the gospel? I'm going to tell you first, it begins with asking God, God, where do you want me to partner? God, where do you want me to partner, and what would that look like? And that as he reveals, or maybe he even just shows you something simply, like here's a need, you have this time block freed, go and meet it. So we're asking God, and then we're seeking out opportunities, looking for where God is opening avenues for service for us to step in. Let's think about it corporately. Corporately, we partner together with other Southern Baptist churches across this country to support thousands of missionaries globally. We partner together for theological education. We partner together for disaster relief. We partner together for the communication of the gospel. We partner together for a great number of things. So that's a way that we're doing this corporately. A number of weeks ago, the Hearts, we had them on a video. They're missionaries from Severance down in Guatemala, and they begin to express some needs they have. They're building a center there, a facility that is going to care for women who are pregnant, going to care for their young children. And as a part of that, Jason talked about his desire to have a facility where he can have men from the village come and spend time together, and ultimately where he can share the gospel. And so he said, man, I have a real heart to partner with this city, this community, to build a soccer field so that we can share the gospel and be intentional about it here in this place. And he said, it's going to cost us about $18,000. One of our members wrote a check not long after that for $18,000 to cover this. Now, they still have about $24,000 to go on their facility. First Service laughed at that. Y'all are actually considering it. I like that much more, so let's just go with it. Maybe where you sit in here, man, you got a really big return this year. You weren't expecting it. You have some bonus money that you didn't know was coming in. And so God is calling you to partner with him, the expansion of the gospel in Guatemala, and that by meeting this financial need. I have a friend that runs a ministry called the Bucket Ministry, and I've been over to serve with them in Kenya. Mike is working with them to help tell their story, and that through video. And God has given them this phenomenal platform to communicate the gospel and to do that really all over the world. And as they're making this movie, it's really expensive to do this. And one of their donors heard about it. And so he wrote a check, and just to be clear, this person is not at Severance, but they wrote them a check for $100,000 to meet this need. There are so many ways that we can partner with God to expand the gospel. It's not all through money. Some of you don't have any money, but you have a lot of time. Some of you have little time, but you have a terrific amount of influence. How can God use the things he's given you that his light shining through you might impact the people of this world? Let me just end with this. One of the things that we experience every single week here at Severance is a terrific number of men and women coming into our doors, calling our phone and just showing up on our property for some type of need. Car's broken down, they need money, they're behind on rent, they have medical bills, or they're just hungry and they just need something to eat. They're sad, they just need somebody to talk with them. So let's just kind of broadly call this benevolence. And what we really need in order for us to be able to partner together with God in the expansion of the gospel is we need the men and women in here, in this room, in this place. We need the ones that God is already putting on your heart to meet this need. Now, the crazy thing about God is that I think there's probably one or two of you in here that every time you drive by the person on the corner with a sign that says, "We'll work for food," your thought goes to, well, if you're working, you wouldn't be out here. Get a job, you bum. And that's your thought. Man, God wants you to be involved with this ministry because he wants to change your heart. You have a selfish, ugly heart before God. You don't see a man or woman made in the image and the likeness of God, and God wants to do a work of sanctification, of making you holy, stripping that from your life. And so you need to be involved in this ministry. And listen, on the other end of the spectrum, there's a man or a woman in this place that your family has had conversations with you. Because when you gave your routing number and account to the person on the corner, that was a bad move. Like your heart is open and you've never met a need you didn't want to meet. God is calling you to come and to serve here. But God is bringing people to our door that desperately need the gospel. It's not a need that the staff can meet on their own. But for some of you here, you have the time, you have the compassion, or you have the capacity to grow in compassion. And this is an opportunity for you to partner for the expansion of the gospel. And I'll tell you what, we thank God for you. And we thank God for what he's doing in your life.